Well, I hope that you've had a good day today. If you haven't, as always, and you're struggling, we certainly want to let you know that we love you and we're praying for you. And if we can do anything for you, we just ask that you would ask us. We're still in the book of James. We're still in James chapter 4. But we will be out of James chapter 4 after tonight, and next week we'll be in James chapter 5. And with that being said, that's it with the book of James. James has 5 chapters. After James chapter 5, we'll have to find another book to study. But for the next few weeks, we'll be in James chapter 5. Tonight, we need to finish chapter 4. So if you haven't read James chapter 4 today, please pause the video, go read James chapter 4, and then come back and we will read the section that we're going to discuss tonight. Before we do that, we're going to rehash just a little bit about what we said last week. Not much, because the lesson Sunday morning kind of went along with what we talked about last Wednesday night. But you might remember that James cautions us. We need to be careful about what we say about others. In fact, we need to be really careful. Our words should be used in such a way that they build people up and not tear people down. When we slander other people and speak bad about other people, that does not please God at all. And then James, you might remember, talks to us a little bit about judging. And like we said last week, Jesus, he also talks about judging. Jesus doesn't condemn judging. Okay? You might remember that passage. Before you judge somebody, you need to take the plank out of your own eye before you can look at the speck in your brother's eye. But after you take the plank out of your own eye, then you'll be able to see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Jesus doesn't condemn judgment, or at least judging others. He condemns hypocritical judgment. And then you remember we talked about a passage that told us, in essence, we need to be careful about judging based on appearance. We need to make sure before we say anything to anybody that our lives are right, that we're not doing the same exact thing that we're about to, accuse somebody else of doing. And before we talk to them about that, we really need to make sure that we know what we're talking about. We don't need to just judge based on appearance. That part is hard for me. I don't know about you. Judging based on appearance, it's easy to do because we see people all the time, don't we? And we think, we might see somebody might come off the street and ask us, hey, I need some money for something. Could we do that? And then we notice, like that's happened to me a lot. And then I'm looking at this person and they're wearing really nice clothes, and I'm like, oh, really? You need money? You need my help to do? Okay, we need to be really careful about that. That gets us to where we are tonight. James chapter 4, we'll start reading in verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. He opens this section, James does, of chapter 4, talking about a person that says, hey, today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city. Hey, it'll be great because when we get to that city, we are going to stay there a year. We're going to buy and sell. We're going to make a profit for ourselves. James has some words for that person. He says, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. That's kind of a scary thought, isn't it? It is the case that you and I, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The jobs that we have right now, we might not have them tomorrow. The house that we have right now, we might not have tomorrow. Our loved ones that we have right now, we might not have them tomorrow. We don't know what tomorrow brings. I guess you could say there's one thing we could know, and that is that we control our relationship with God, so we can know whether we have a good relationship with God or a bad relationship. But as far as our earthly existence is concerned, we have no clue what's going to happen tomorrow. James then says, what is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Now, I don't know how you feel when you read that verse. I'm a little crushed, maybe, sometimes when I read that verse, because I think, wow, I mean, way to put me down a little bit, James. I mean, I'm just a mist. I'm just something that's here for a moment, and then I'm gone. That's again, he's tying this point back to, you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? Well, it's like a mist. I think I've told this story before, maybe in a lesson. I guess if I have, you'll have to hear it again, so you can't tell me that you've heard it before, but I'll tell it. I remember when I was in high school, I would go to Lambert Bookhouse every single day during the summer and just sit over there and read and, help them out with some things over there. Well, it's a very large building, but it was inevitable. During the summer, a storm would come just about every other day. All right, just a summer thunderstorm, it would just pop up. Now, it was sweltering outside at this time. I mean, we all know we live in Alabama, and Alabama summertime, it's just hot. It's really, really hot. You walk outside and it's humid and it's like 98 degrees and the heat index is like 104. It's sweltering. Well, every other day, these summer thunderstorms, they would pop up, and they'd be really strong storms. Well, I remember I'd just sit in there and read. I'd go look out the window and watch the storms. Well, 3 hours usually would go by, and I would get in my car and I'd go home. Well, I'd go home on Hilton Drive, and every single time after a thunderstorm happened, during the summer, if you're on Hilton Drive, I've never seen it where it's not this way. You can see steam coming off the road. And that steam goes up just a little ways. And then before you know it, it's gone. And the rest will go up a little ways, and before you know it, it's gone. And the rest will go up a little ways, and before you know it, it's gone. And it'll keep going, and it's gone. And it'll keep going, and it's gone. And it'll keep going, and it's gone. That is the way our lives are. James says, look, life is short. Some lives are shorter than others. Some people, they die really early. Maybe sometimes as little children. Some people die in their teens. Some people die in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Some people live until they're 90. Some live until they're 100 years old. But life is short. You're a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. What do you think about that phrase, instead you ought to say, if the Lord lives, we will live and do this or that? I've heard people, usually when you're making plans, some people, when you're making plans with them and you talk about, doing something, I don't know, next Tuesday, somebody will say, well, yeah, Lord willing. Lord willing, we'll do something too. Don't forget the Lord willing part. What do you think about that? Do you think James means every time you make plans for the future, you have to say, if the Lord wills, because if you don't say, if the Lord wills, well, you're just in the wrong. I don't think that's what James is saying. Okay, well, if that's not what James is saying, what is James saying? I think James is trying to communicate to us the very point that we've already made tonight. Our lives are short, and because of that, we need to know that if we make it to next week, or we make it beyond next week, it'll be nothing to do with us. It'll have nothing to do with us. It will be because of God. He is the one that gives us life. He is the one that created us, and He is the one that will take our life. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. Well, who is the one boasting in their arrogance? Oh, it's the one that says, hey, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. The ones that aren't thinking about, well, my life is short, so I should probably think about God maybe when I'm making plans. That's the person that boasts in their arrogance. It is pretty arrogant of us to think that we will live another 3, 4, 5 years on our own. Every day that we have, I think there's truth in this. No, I don't think. I know there's truth in what I'm about to say here. Every single day that we live, it's because of God. Right? We've talked about that idea before. The air that we breathe, that's because of God. The life that we have, it's because God continues to let it go on. If we're given another week on this earth, or another year, or another 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, it's because of God. Has nothing to do with ourselves. We can't control what happens. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. It is evil to live a life and think that life is always going to be there and never give credit to God for our existence. That's evil, James says. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. We know that verse a lot, don't we? For whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, to him it is sin. I mean, James says, what's sin? Well, that's sin. The person who knows what they ought to do, but they choose not to do it, that's sin. Knowing we should give God credit for our existence and not doing that is sin. That's arrogance, James calls it. Our life is like a mist. That might scare you a little bit. It doesn't scare, well, I guess I should say, it scares me a little bit. But, I think about some things in my life and I think, man, I mean, I'm ready to go at any moment. Don't get me wrong. But I just think about Ariel, and I think about my parents, and I think about my friends. And I just think, when I think about death, I just think, yeah, I'm ready to go at any moment, but I'd like to just stay here for maybe, I don't know how you feel about that. Maybe that's selfish on my part. Here's the bottom line. God will always take care of his people. Our lives here on this earth, they're great. I mean, we have everything we could possibly need. But the point of our existence is not just to continue here on this earth. Our point of our existence is to praise God and to give Him all the glory, and eventually go spend eternity with Him. If there's something that James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17 is trying to get across to us, it's number one, we need to give credit to God for our life because He's the one that gives it to us. Number two, maybe more indirectly here, we need to be ready when our life ends. Because there is truth in that it could be any moment. So we need to spend some time reflecting on our life. We need to spend some time. How are we living lately? What about our Bible reading? Maybe that would be a good place to start. Maybe to reflect on, are we living the spiritual life that we ought to live? How much time are we spending in the Bible? Because if we're not spending a lot of time in the Bible, it's probably the case that maybe we're not talking like we should, maybe we're looking at some things we shouldn't, maybe we're treating people in a way that's not. And then maybe we evaluate our prayer life. Are we talking to God? Prayer, it's a fascinating thing. But for some reason, sometimes we don't do it as much as we should. How much do we pray? And then maybe we ought to think, when's the last time I told somebody about Jesus? Because if it's been if it's been 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7 years since we've told somebody about Jesus, we might not be doing what God put us here to do. We need to be ready. We always need to be ready. Our life should be spent in constant preparation for the next life. That's really what James is trying to tell us here in James chapter 4. I know I said we wouldn't get into James chapter 5, but we have a few more minutes, so we'll go ahead and at least read what we're going to talk about next week. James chapter 5, we'll start there in verse 1. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Guess what we're talking about next week? We are going to talk about riches. And guess who is rich? You and I. We're rich. So James has something to remind us about he has something to say about our riches. Hope you have a great rest of the week. I can't wait to see everybody on Sunday. God bless.